You've been doing keto for weeks, maybe months. The bread and the sugar are gone. You're running on fat for fuel, and when you lift your shirt and look at that layer sitting around your midsection, it hasn't moved at all. And the frustrating part is, you're doing everything right. The problem isn't your discipline. There's a biological reason that specific fat is still there, and it has nothing to do with how strict your diet is. Here's what most keto content won't tell you. Visceral fat, the fat wrapped around your liver, your pancreas, your intestines, is not the same as the fat on your thighs or your arms. It is an active organ. It has its own blood supply, its own hormonal output, its own defense system, and it protects itself with a sophistication that makes standard keto advice completely insufficient. Ketosis solves one problem: it drops insulin. That's real, and that matters. But visceral fat has 4 additional locks on it that insulin has nothing to do with. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly what those locks are and the specific lever that opens each one. Stay until the end because the last one is the mechanism that ties everything together. And without it, the other 4 don't fully work. 1. The cortisol lock. Let's start with the one that is sabotaging more keto dieters than anything else. Visceral fat contains more cortisol receptors than any other fat depot in the human body. Not slightly more, significantly more. Think of them as high-sensitivity antennas tuned specifically to your stress hormone. When cortisol is elevated, those receptors fire, and the fat tissue receives one clear signal: hold. Do not release. We are in a crisis. Here's why this destroys keto results specifically. You eliminated carbs, insulin dropped. The metabolic door to fat burning opened. But if cortisol is chronically elevated, it doesn't matter that the door is open. Cortisol is standing in the doorway blocking it. It triggers gluconeogenesis, your liver manufacturing glucose from protein and tissue, which raises blood sugar and pulls insulin back up. You are in ketosis and simultaneously generating the hormonal environment that prevents visceral fat from moving. The sources of this chronic cortisol are rarely dramatic. It's the under-eating that comes with strict keto. It's the over-exercising that many people layer on top of dieting. It's the 5 hours of sleep. It's the skipped meals followed by a massive protein load at dinner. Each one individually is manageable. Combined, they create a sustained cortisol output that visceral fat feeds on. The practical fix is not meditation, it is specific. Eat enough calories to signal abundance, not scarcity. Cap intense exercise at 3 sessions per week with full recovery between them. And protect sleep like it is the diet, because hormonally it is. When cortisol drops, those receptors go quiet. The fat loses its primary defender, but even with cortisol handled, there's a second trap that most keto dieters walk straight into. 2. The protein trap. You removed carbs, so you replace them with protein. More chicken, more eggs, more Greek yogurt. Your macros look clean, your meals feel satisfying, and your insulin is still being triggered multiple times a day. Here is the mechanism most keto content glosses over. Protein raises insulin. Not as aggressively as carbohydrates, but meaningfully, especially in large quantities consumed in a single sitting. When you eat 60 or 70 grams of protein in one meal, the pancreas responds, insulin goes up. And when insulin is up, fat burning stops. The door closes. This is the keto paradox. The people most committed to the diet, the ones eating the most protein to compensate for eliminating carbs, are the ones most consistently spiking insulin without realizing it. A study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition confirmed that high-protein meals produce a significant insulin response independent of carbohydrate intake. The response is dose-dependent. The larger the protein load in a single sitting, the larger the spike. The fix is distribution, not reduction. You still need adequate protein. It preserves muscle, which preserves your metabolic rate. But spreading that protein across meals rather than concentrating it keeps the insulin response low and manageable at each sitting. 30 to 40 grams per meal instead of 70 in one shot. Same total intake, completely different hormonal outcome. Insulin is now handled, cortisol is handled. But most people doing keto are operating at a ketone level that is too low to actually mobilize visceral fat at any meaningful rate. 3. The ketone threshold. Not all ketosis is the same. This is the part of keto nobody explains clearly enough. Nutritional ketosis begins at 0.5 millimoles per liter of blood ketones. Most people doing standard keto sit between 0.5 and 1.0. They are technically in ketosis. Their body is producing ketones. But at this level, the metabolic shift is incomplete. The body is using ketones as fuel, but it has not fully committed to pulling from visceral stores. Research shows that visceral fat mobilization accelerates significantly above 1.5 millimoles. This is called optimal ketosis. At this threshold, the hormonal environment shifts more aggressively toward fat oxidation. Growth hormone output increases. Insulin sensitivity improves further. The body stops hedging and commits. Most people never get there. Not because they're doing keto wrong, but because they're doing lazy keto. Too many hidden carbs, too much protein in one sitting, eating windows that are too wide. The gap between 0.8 and 1.8 millimoles is the difference between mild metabolic adaptation and aggressive visceral fat mobilization. 3 specific levers push ketones into this range without extended fasting. First, a 10 to 15 minute brisk walk. First thing in the morning before eating depletes residual liver glycogen and forces the body into deeper ketosis earlier in the day. Second, MCT oil consumed in the morning, specifically C8 caprylic acid, converts to ketones faster than any dietary fat and measurably elevates blood ketone levels within 90 minutes. Third, compressing your eating window to 8 hours or less keeps the overnight fasting period long enough to drive ketones upward each morning. These 3 combined reliably push ketone levels into the optimal range. But even at optimal ketosis, there is a barrier around visceral fat that purely metabolic approaches cannot fully dissolve. 4. The inflammation barrier. This is the mechanism that makes visceral fat uniquely stubborn compared to every other fat depot in the body. Visceral fat is not passive. It is metabolically active tissue that continuously secretes inflammatory compounds called cytokines, specifically TNF-alpha, IL-6, and resistin. These compounds create a localized inflammatory environment directly around the fat tissue. And here is the cruel biology of it. That inflammation physically inhibits the enzymatic process of lipolysis, the breakdown of fat cells for fuel. The fat is essentially hiding behind a wall of its own inflammatory output. This is why people can be in deep ketosis, eating perfectly, and still feel that their midsection is inflamed, hard, and resistant. It is not psychological. The tissue is actively blocking its own breakdown. 2 compounds directly suppress these cytokines at the tissue level. Omega-3 fatty acids, specifically EPA and DHA found in fatty fish and quality fish oil, compete with the inflammatory prostaglandins that visceral fat produces. A clinical trial published in the Journal of Nutrition found that omega-3 supplementation significantly reduced visceral fat area independent of caloric intake. The mechanism is direct cytokine suppression, not calorie manipulation. The second compound is magnesium. Most people are deficient. Magnesium directly regulates the inflammatory pathways that visceral fat exploits. It also improves insulin sensitivity and sleep quality, which connects directly back to cortisol. 300 to 400 milligrams of magnesium glycinate before bed addresses the inflammation, the sleep, and the cortisol issue simultaneously. Ketosis itself, sustained over several weeks, also progressively reduces systemic inflammation through the production of beta-hydroxybutyrate, the primary ketone body, which has direct anti-inflammatory properties. This is why results on keto often accelerate after the 4 to 6 week mark. The inflammation wall starts coming down. With the inflammation barrier addressed, there is one final mechanism that determines how fast everything else works. 5. The growth hormone signal. This is the one almost nobody connects to visceral fat loss, and it is arguably the most powerful hormonal driver of the entire process. Growth hormone is the primary signal that mobilizes visceral fat specifically, not subcutaneous fat, not muscle, visceral fat. Studies show that visceral fat cells have a high density of growth hormone receptors. When growth hormone pulses, those cells respond by releasing stored fat into circulation to be burned. The problem is that growth hormone is brutally suppressed by the modern lifestyle. Chronic stress suppresses it. Poor sleep suppresses it. And here's the one that hits keto dieters specifically. Elevated insulin suppresses it completely. Growth hormone and insulin cannot both be high simultaneously. They are biological opposites. This means every time you spike insulin, through excess protein, hidden carbs, late-night eating, you are not just pausing fat burning. You are suppressing the single most powerful hormone for visceral fat mobilization. Growth hormone peaks at two specific times, during deep, slow-wave sleep in the first half of the night and immediately following high-intensity physical effort. These are not suggestions. They are the two windows where the body releases the largest pulses of this hormone. The practical application is precise. 2 sprint sessions per week, 15 to 20 seconds of absolute maximum effort followed by complete rest, trigger a growth hormone response that sustained cardio never achieves. Some research shows acute HGH increases of up to 700% following this type of effort. The key is the intensity and the rest. Half effort produces a fraction of the response. For sleep, the protocol is straightforward. Stop eating at least 3 hours before bed to ensure insulin is low during the first sleep cycle. Keep the room cold. Growth hormone secretion is temperature sensitive. And address the cortisol issue already discussed, because high cortisol at night directly suppresses the overnight growth hormone pulse. When these two windows are protected consistently, the hormonal environment shifts in a way that no dietary manipulation alone can replicate. The full picture. Here is what is actually happening when visceral fat refuses to move on keto. Cortisol is flooding the receptors and telling the fat to hold. Protein is being eaten in quantities that keep triggering insulin. Ketone levels are sitting in the low range where fat adaptation is incomplete. The fat tissue is hiding behind its own inflammatory output. And growth hormone, the primary signal to mobilize it, is being suppressed by poor sleep and the wrong exercise approach. Fix the cortisol by eating enough, sleeping enough, and recovering between training sessions. Distribute protein across meals to keep insulin low at every sitting. Push ketones into the optimal range with morning movement, MCT oil, and a compressed eating window. Suppress visceral fat's inflammatory defense with omega-3s and magnesium. And protect the 2 growth hormone windows, deep sleep and sprint effort, like they are non-negotiable. This is not about being more strict with keto. Most people doing keto are already strict enough. It is about being more precise. Visceral fat is not stubborn because your diet is wrong. It is stubborn because it is a protected organ with multiple defense layers. You don't break through it with more restriction. You break through it by systematically dismantling each defense. When you do, the results don't come gradually, they come in a shift. Energy increases, the midsection stops feeling inflamed. The fat that wouldn't budge for months begins to move, because you finally stopped fighting the symptom and started addressing what was actually protecting it. If this breakdown made things click, subscribe. There's more of this coming, and drop a comment below. Are you measuring your ketone levels or just guessing? Most people are guessing. That's usually where the problem starts.